Hi. How you doing? Good, good. Okay, pop quiz. Who was the prophet of last week's first reading? We talked about last week, Old Testament. I compared myself to him, that Elijah was going to put his mantle upon this young guy. Elijah had been prophet of Israel for 32 years, and this young whippersnapper came in. What's his name? Elisha. Here's the distinction that's very important for this community. Elisha is the Old Testament prophet. Alicia is the executive director of the Catholic Student Center. Some of you went up to Alicia, I don't know who, and said, it was so nice of him to include you in the homily. An oversight on my part. I could give many homilies on the virtues of Alicia, but I'm going to stick with the readings that have been given to us by the church. So yes, Elisha was the Old Testament prophet. And what was the message that I said that is so crucial for a prophet to believe about oneself if they're going to be able to spread the message of the Lord? If they don't have this truth as a core of who they are from God, how are they going to be able to spread the message of God? You are good. Yes, thank you. Okay, yes. Well, some of you were like, Alicia, I didn't know. It's like, yeah, you are fine. Yeah, no, it's like, no, you are good, right. And that's a core identity. And I think it's something that we receive from this altar. It's something that we receive from the encouragement of the Word. And I'd like to give another encouragement, and I think an essential message of being a disciple of Jesus, and it's this: you are loved. You are loved. Now, we sit on the footsteps of one of the finest institutions in this country, and I would say in the world. And so intellectually, I think we can talk about love and say, yeah, no, I know that I'm loved. Right? People have been giving me praise for the things that I've accomplished. I know that my parents, in some way, since I'm still living, love me, right? In those ways, there's some sort of exchange that we understand love. But this is a word that we use so freely. We also use about pizza. I love pizza. Yes, of course you do, right? St. Louisans among us here, right? Most of the weight that I've gained over the last couple of years is from Emos, right? And so just knowing, yes, this is a paid sponsorship. No, it's not. But knowing that I love pizza and I love someone, how is it that we can use those so interchangeably? The limits of our language. Love, if you've really experienced love before, is all-consuming, all-encompassing. It's transformative. I thought I was in love once, in 8th grade. I think one of my grade school classmates is here, so he might know who it is. But Jenny was someone that, you know, I had eyes for, as it were, in the early months of the year 2000. And, you know, so we were all worried about the computers crashing, and they didn't. So we thought, wow, this is a whole new springtime, the age of Aquarius of our own generation. And so I went and pursued Jenny's hand at the lock-in. And afterwards, and since we were in love, I knew that it was my responsibility to give her a present for the final days of school. And what other present but flowers could a poor 14-year-old boy be able to give? And so I went to my neighbor's garden, sorry, Tracy, and snipped each day a different flower. Very obviously, like, look at this rose, snip. And I was like, here, Jenny, I'm in love with you. And she said, thank you. So after 5 days, when the school year ended, I realized that I didn't have any other gifts. And when she called me the following week and broke up with me, I know, therapy helps, it does. I knew that perhaps that wasn't love. It was an interest. But love, those of you that have experienced love, those of you that have been in love, understand that it makes you do far crazier things. Far crazier things than snipping off your neighbor's roses from her well-manicured garden. So in this way, recognizing that love makes us do these astounding things. Think of, some of you have moved cities. You have uprooted your lives. You have changed careers or sacrificed them altogether. You have raised love in your arms. You have gone forth and done things that your friends and family have thought to be foolish in the name of love. Where's the origin of all of this? God is love. And the love that the Lord has for you is so indescribable that I'm going to try. We hear in the first reading from the prophet Zechariah, you don't have to remember him, but it'd be nice if you did, right? He's in the Bible. In the Old Testament, he's talking about your king. And the Americans in the room are like, whoa, okay, no kings, right? We are independent people. But to understand our ancestors as they're in this great exile, that tribe and regime after regime are coming in and taking over, they needed this king to rescue them. The promised Messiah. Notice, chariot and horse will not be in Jerusalem. What does that mean? Those conquering people, they're not going to be here any longer because our king loves you, daughter Zion, and comes to embrace you and cherish you for the true possession of love that is his. And just to be able to receive that now, millennia later, as a truth that still stands for you. The Lord sees you and your exile, and he comes to rescue you. He comes to transform and redeem you. How does the Lord do this? By becoming one of us. And I don't know about you, but being a human's kind of hard. And for God to choose to become one of us is pretty crazy. It's hard enough to believe, yeah? But the fact that God became one of us, took on flesh to save us, as we hear St. Paul talk about in the second readings from Romans, to save us from that very sin of flesh, and to be able to transform flesh and to make it what it was always intended to be, which is good, and to be able to help us to live in the Spirit, which is long-lasting. God's very breath breathed into Adam and Eve in the garden. That same Holy Spirit that's breathed into you, this is something that you can believe and share. This is the thing that compels you and motivates you to do those crazy things in the name of love. And if they're truly united to Jesus, our intent, our motive is pure. There are times when my love is not completely united to the Lord, and I have to continue to check that and to be able to continue to recognize the ways in which he's helping me to become more and more like his son. And I think all of us in our way are able to look and to be able to examine and to say, I want to be more like Jesus. I want to be more like love. I want Jesus to be the one to satisfy my heart more than anything else. Because we've lived some collective years here. And after a while, we just recognize that as good as the world is, we're meant for so much more. And that's why Jesus gives us Matthew chapter 11. Truly, this passage, up until verse 30, in this gospel that we have today, can really change your life. I encourage you to pray with it. Because how does it start? This passage talks about Jesus praising God the Father and saying, thank you so much. You have revealed these things, not to the wise and learned, right? No offense to the wise and learned, but those who live with childlike faith are the ones that are able to receive it. It's not that we're against education by any means, but we just want, as we're learning, to have that openness and that simplicity and that gentleness. But then there's this prayer that just seems like a throwaway line, but has changed my prayer completely. It's a plea from love, from Jesus to us. He says, come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Come to me means that there's an onus on our part. He is definitely coming to us. We see him coming to us in the Eucharist, in the living word. We see in all the different graces that we receive from the sacraments and the ways in which his grace is present in the world. A nice, sunshiny day. Sometimes I get ahead of my words because, I'm already talking to people this afternoon. But in this way, to recognize that Jesus has done this so passionately for us, And he wants us to say, I'll love you too, by the way in which we live our lives. And that means we have to move. We have to move from our sin. We have to move from that place of woundedness. We have to move from that cynicism and that negativity and that bitterness and that gossip. We have to move from that to him. Because all of that and the heaviness of life is a burden. Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Have you ever had one of those sleeps where you wake up and you're like, oh, yeah. That's like every night here at the Student Center, just so you know. It's been wonderful. But noticing when you wake up in that spiritual sense to the refreshment of being a child of the Lord and knowing profoundly that you are loved, even when you've got all this other stuff going on in your life. It's so freeing. And that's the promise of Zechariah's promised Messiah. That's the promise when Jesus sheds his life for us, because he wants us to have that love. What's the other part of that final part of Matthew 11, 29 and 30 verses? It's when he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. That's the one that I bristle against. I'm like, I'm good, right? Take my yoke. Don't yoke me. What does that mean? And to take a yoke, think about an animal that's carrying a yoke. What is that doing? They're plowing. But what does a yoke imply? It implies that you're yoked with something, or in this case, with someone. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because he's already in the yoke. He doesn't want you to do it on your own. Self-sufficiency is not something a Christian should live for. But instead, in daily prayer, she or he comes before her king and allows the Lord to say, okay, this is the illness, this is the unemployment, this is the family situation, this is the deep wound. Will you allow me to do it with you? You are carrying a cross. Will you allow me to teach you how to do it? To learn from me? You who are meek and humble of heart? This is the invitation from love. And just as a convincer, he says before he dies, this is my body, which will be given up for you. That's what Catholics believe, that this bread here is transformed into God, truly God present, transforming what it was into God, Jesus himself, so that you might be able to ingest love and to allow the grace of receiving Jesus to be the instrument to help you to take on that yoke. I don't know what Jenny's doing now, my ex. But I do know, as wonderful as a woman that she is, that there's something greater for all of us than just a crush, than just an interest, than just an infatuation. There comes a point in time with Jesus where we choose to say, Jesus, I love you too. And I know many of you have been a part of this community for a long time, and some of you are new here, and some of you are returning, and I just want to say it's a privilege to be able to walk with you. But the greatest thing that I can do as a priest is to be able to help you to experience the love of God, the overwhelming, all-consuming love that is yours. Come to me, he says. And I just invite you in your prayer during this Mass to open up your heart to receive that love. That love can't wait to give you. Please stand.